HMS Lord Clive was one of 8 12-inch gun monitors built for the Royal Navy in 1915, having spare 12-inch guns from older pre-dreadnoughts that were of limited value. Lord Clive and her sisters were constructed after the relative ease and speed at which the 14-inch gun monitors were constructed. It also helped that the first Lord of the Admiralty was Winston Churchill, and the first Sea Lord of the Admiralty was Jackie Fisher, both known for their schemes. With Churchill's bombardment of the Dardanelles and further campaigns there, not to mention Admiral Fisher's Baltic project, in which the use of these monitors would be crucial. So, Lord Clive, upon commissioning in 1915, was used in various bombardment roles up and down the English Channel as part of the Dover Patrol, even being part of the raids on Ostend and Zeebrugge. But what she is best known for is a rather large modification of a single 18-inch gun, one of the largest guns ever fitted to a Royal Navy warship. The gun was from the large light cruiser HMS Furious. This modification came late in the war, and Lord Clive didn't get to use it very much. After the war, she performed some gunnery trials, but that was about it, being scrapped in 1927. The idea of a small ship with a big gun in a shallow draft was a concept that can be roughly traced back to the Age of Sail, when British and French forces used bomb vessels at the end of the 17th century to bombard forts, at places like Tripoli and Genoa. In the Iron and Steam Age, these vessels came to be in the Crimean War and especially the American Civil War. With this in mind, in the stalemate of the First World War, the Admiralty in November 1914, now under the command of Admiral Jackie Fisher as the First Sea Lord and Winston Churchill as the First Lord, they desired to find a way to break the stalemate that had already set in using the Grand Fleet. They wanted to strike Germany decisively in a vulnerable spot. As I mentioned in the introduction, Fisher had been a proponent of his Baltic project, where an offensive against the Pomeranian coast could enable a landing with Russian support only 90 miles from Berlin. Obviously, for this to occur, the High Seas Fleet would need to be decisively neutralized. Not only that, the shallow water of the Baltic enabled it to be easily mined, meaning the big gun battleships with their deep drafts would be at risk for such operations. Stabilization of the Western Front also offered possibilities to land in the Low Countries against German positions. Once the Ottomans entered the war, there were opportunities to open the Dardanelles to get supplies and materials to Russia. Again, this required support of big guns, but Britain did not have ships to effectively and somewhat safely reach enemy strongpoints and strong shore defenses. What Britain did have were a lot of big guns from obsolete pre-dreadnoughts and others that didn't need them anymore. An interesting point in the development of the Royal Navy monitors is in November 1914, when Charles Schwab was on the RMS Olympic and witnessed the sinking of HMS Audacious north of Ireland. Schwab was there to sell arms to Britain. Once Jellicoe had released him and the other passengers, he went and talked to Churchill, where he offered to sell him the 14-inch guns Bethlehem Steelworks was building for the Greek battleship Salamis in Germany. As long as the British blockade withstood, Schwab was happy to sell them to Churchill, and the idea of the first British monitors was conceived. To quote Big Gun Monitors, Design, Construction, and Operations 1914 to 1945 by Ian Buxton, by the standards of Ericsson's original design, the British concept was not strictly a monitor, but over the intervening half-century, the term could reasonably be considered as having evolved somewhat to embrace a new type, which still owed something of its characteristics to the first monitor. Within the Royal Navy, the description monitor would be distinctive and unambiguous, while not giving away too much as to their expected operational role. The Royal Navy first constructed several 14-inch gun monitors, and once realizing the rapidity with which those construction of those 14-inch monitors got underway, plus with the coastal bombardment opportunities I had mentioned before, including the Dardanelles as the Ottomans had entered the war, it encouraged Churchill to plan further big gun monitors, telling Fisher about reserve 13.5-inch guns meant for Audacious, as well as reserve 15-inch and 18-inch howitzers, hoping to have more of these monitors out by the autumn of 1915. After roping in Fisher and the Third Sea Lord, they found the spare 13.5-inch guns and even spare 15-inch guns. However, these weren't practical as they were better served with the battleships and battle cruisers. Another possibility laid open, taking the mountings from existing ships. As many of you know, Britain had a lot of older pre-dreadnoughts, who carried 4 12-inch guns apiece and were now of limited value. The oldest of which were the 9 Majestic class designed in 1893. So it was proposed that 4 of the ships would have their 12-inch 35 caliber guns dismounted, and with that, 8 new monitors could be armed. Some modifications to the elevation of the guns were needed, and within a day, the 13.5-degree elevation of the guns was quickly modified to 30 degrees, and over 21,000 yards of range could be achieved by the guns. The ship's design was little changed from the previous 14-inch gun monitors, having a draft of about 10 feet and 15-foot bulges. I mean, look at these bulges. If you thought Glatten and Gorgon looked funny, these are awesome. Anyway, it was hoped the machinery could be diesel, but they were still in their infancy and so not practical. Steam reciprocators were the solution, giving them around 2,000 shaft horsepower with steam provided by two boilers and a top speed of a little under 10 knots. Since the armament was 367 tons lighter than the 14-inch guns, the hull could be made slightly narrower, also simplifying the issue of berthing these odd ships. More important for the crew, the thickness of the sloping armor belt was increased from 4 inches to 6 inches, resulting in a displacement of 5,600 tons as compared to the almost 6,000 tons of the earlier class. As you can see from this picture, the ships were pretty sparse, with only the main battery and a few smaller guns that were added on. The tripod mast, funnel, and other fittings on the forecastle deck, which ran 3/4 of the length of the ship. The aft section being open, providing a space to arrange stowage for observation seaplanes, making monitors the first ships designed from the outset to carry aircraft. The upper deck was open at the sides, containing the galleys and wash places, together with the barbette structure surrounding the ammunition trunk of the turret. The lower decks were where the coal bunkers and machinery spaces were, magazine spaces, and the accommodation for the crew, which was about 200 men and not exactly roomy. After working out who was going to build the ships and changes to their machinery to triple expansion engines, the 8 ships of the class began to be laid down, being named for British generals. The names being, of course, Lord Clive, Sir John Moore, General Crawford, Earl of Peterborough, Prince Rupert, Prince Eugene, Sir Thomas Picton, and General Wolfe. Once in service, their deep load displacement was around 5,850 tons. They were given anti-aircraft guns, which were the smaller ones seen on their decks. Lord Clive and 2 of her sisters were intended for the Dardanelles. Instead, they were directed towards the Dover Squadron in the summer of 1915. Churchill identified the U-boat base near Zeebrugge as the first bombardment target for the new monitors. So on August 9th, 1915, Lord Clive, Prince Rupert, and Sir John Moore, under the command of Vice Admiral Reginald Bacon, began practicing their bombardment with a mock-up of Zeebrugge in the Thames estuary. Through the spotting practice and the success of the trials, it seemed that the monitors were ready on the 21st of August. After some weather delays, the monitors and a considerable escorting force of destroyers, minesweepers, and a seaplane carrier departed for Zeebrugge. Setting up station about 10 miles off the coast, Lord Clive and the other monitors opened up at 5:36 a.m. on the 23rd, targeting the locks of the canals leading to the naval base at Bruges, but a secondary target was an industrial works. The Lord Clive performed very well, quickly finding her mark and keeping up her fire for an hour and a half, dropping 31 rounds in the vicinity of the locks and 11 in the industrial works. Her sisters performed considerably worse, having mechanical failures and other issues. Vice Admiral Bacon thought he had done considerable damage to the German positions, but that wasn't the case, sinking a couple barges, killing Belgian civilians, and damaging some buildings. After this moderate success in the eyes of the British, another raid was ordered in September, where Lord Clive found herself on the wrong end of German guns. At about 3:50, she received 4 hits in quick succession. One on the port bulge aft, one on the starboard 2-pounder. Fortunately, the shell did not explode, although it knocked the gun onto the quarterdeck. One hit alongside the bulge forward and another on the bows, which severely shook the turret. It was obvious to Bacon that it would not be long before one of the steeply plunging shells would hit Lord Clive fair and square, penetrate right through her decks, to explode near her keel. Furthermore, falling rigging had severely injured Carter, so he gave the order to retire. Lord Clive's damage was little more than scratches, and more missions followed later in September with little success. Several more operations followed, but this rate of fire could not be maintained, as ammunition stocks were limited. Also was the supply of spare gun barrels, and by October, Lord Clive's guns needed to be replaced. After this was done, the 12-inch armed ships of the Dover Patrol bombarded batteries around West End in January 1916 to support Marshal Foch. This proved to be the last bombardment for 7 months, wherein they were refit, with some receiving 6-inch guns to strengthen their anti-destroyer defenses, and other operations like guarding the channel against German incursions, where they proved very capable of doing so, and soon the German destroyers learned to fear the sound of the 12-inch guns, retreating upon seeing their flash. By July, the monitors were back on the French and Belgian coast, bombarding German batteries. Lord Clive was given a dummy funnel to look like a newly arrived monitor. Now, Lord Clive continued to support British and Allied advances on land, and it was planned to use her and her sister to support the Passchendaele offensive by helping a planned landing near Ostend, including carrying men and other equipment close to shore. This didn't happen as the offensive didn't advance far enough. Things began to get really interesting in December 1917, when Lord Clive, Prince Eugene, and General Wolfe were taken into Portsmouth to take on an 18-inch gun. As you see, the large light cruiser HMS Furious, originally part of Fisher's Baltic project, to whom these 18-inch guns originally belonged to, was going through her own refits to make her quite the interesting carrier with her multiple flight decks. Originally, these guns were in revolving turrets on Furious, but mounting that onto a 6,000-ton warship was not practicable without the removal of the 12-inch gun and the rearrangement of the machinery. So, a completely different design was chosen, with the whole mount weighing 384 tons, including the 149-ton gun. It was nearly doubled when ammunition was on board, presenting even more problems for these little ships. Proposals in the summer of 1917 called for the strengthening of the forecastle deck abaft the funnel to take on the mounting, but leaving the existing armament undisturbed. As there was no room for ammunition below decks, a day's worth of ammunition would have to be kept on the upper decks, with cordite cases on the forecastle deck. A light shield would be placed on the mounting, and so arranged to allow the massive gun to have 45 degrees of elevation. Because they didn't want to change the machinery or 12-inch guns, the only place they could put this mounting was abaft the engine room, increasing the draft to 14 feet and reducing the freeboard to 4 feet. Through closing up the inboard bulge compartments, which were normally open to the sea, this was somewhat fixed, and the ships now weighed 6,850 tons. The after part of the bulge was fully submerged, increasing the risk of a torpedo riding over and exploding, so heavy metal deflectors were fit over the bulge. In December, when the three ships were taken in hand, the first two, Lord Clive and Prince Eugene, were done in April and returned to service. However, General Wolfe didn't return until August due to problems with her conversion. The problem for Lord Clive was the fact that she didn't have her gun and her mounting after returning to service because they were still working on getting them and trying to figure out how they were going to install them properly. Eventually, in September 1918, Lord Clive got her 18-inch gun, having a rather bare and unique appearance as compared to the General Wolfe, who had gotten some more work done in the docks. Before Lord Clive got her gun, she returned to service in April 1918, and along with the new commanding officer. With this, the Admiralty had a new plan for blocking Ostend and Zeebrugge, where Lord Clive and Prince Eugene were to target the Tirpitz and Aachen batteries. They first tried on April 11th, which was called off after the monitors had fired almost 50 rounds. Lord Clive and the three other monitors came back on the 23rd, helping in the partially successful raid, drawing some of the fires the block ships went in and partially blocked the canal entrance at Zeebrugge, which the Germans soon cleared. After this, she went to relieve HMS Roberts as a guard ship at Yarmouth for about 5 weeks. She next received her 18-inch gun and mounting at Portsmouth. As the war was not developing in Germany's favor, and the Entente forces pushed east, Lord Clive joined HMS Wolfe on October 14th, firing at German positions from almost 34,000 yards away. Lord Clive only fired a single round, as her gun had not been calibrated, so the range was off. Trying again later that day, firing 3 rounds, again all unspotted. Not wanting to hit Allied troops accidentally, she fired the remainder of her shells that were in her gun at a minefield 20,000 yards away. This was the only time she fired her 18-inch gun in anger. Following the war, she and the other 12-inch monitors were quickly paid off. Yet her story doesn't end there. Buxton explains that in her post-war career, after having been laid up for 19 months, she was towed to Portsmouth in September 1920 to be converted to carry 3 15-inch guns for trial purposes. The design of the projected 1921 battlecruisers included this turret. The Royal Navy wanted to test this arrangement of 15-inch guns, and therefore refit Lord Clive with this new arrangement, and thus removed her 18-inch guns and secondary battery, and some additional strengthening was included. The construction of the new arrangement for the triple 15-inch gun lasted until February 1921. Because of the cancellation of the new class of battlecruisers, her trials ended up not being that important, although successful. She was soon laid up again and then sold off for scrapping in 1927. Now, she didn't get to use that big 18-inch gun very much. Still, I think the monitors of the Dover Patrol all had interesting careers, and should be looked at more, as should all the monitors, as they played important roles in this war and the next. The next one I'll probably cover will be General Wolfe, as she actually got to use her 18-inch gun a lot more. Anyway, by the time you all are watching this, I'll be knees deep in my internship, so wish me luck. Thank you all for watching, and please remember to like and subscribe as it will help the channel to grow. Until next time, my friends, have a great day.